Cool. Well, it's awesome to see everybody. Really excited about the news hour, as always, Regenerati News Hour. And so we're going to just kind of be, free flowing here. There's folks who are in the community who are grant recipients, some more. There's some folks from the Regen Foundation. And then, of course, everybody here in the audience, if you've got questions or ideas or want to just jump into the conversation, by all means do. Um, there's so Daniel, do you want to just say hello? And I don't know if you had already introduced yourself before I hopped on, but do you want to share a little bit about Stakefish and Stakefish coming on as a validator and our work together at BICO WG to kind of get things rolling here?
Yes, sir. Hello, everyone. I'm from Stakefish. I head the protocols team. Um, we mainly work on governance, and yeah, I've been part of the blockchain infrastructure carbon offset working group together with Gregory, Dave from Lowacom, and a lot of the crypto climate folks that have been really hitting the streets early on. I guess a fun story is I met Gregory first December 2020 when we were trying to figure out how to do some offsetting and carbon emissions measurement for our Stakefish validator, our validator services, and also our sister company F2 Pool, where I lead special projects. And F2 Pool being like the world's largest Bitcoin mining pool, there was a lot of uh, criticism that we're receiving, and so yeah, we had a fun time, Gregory and I, working on some presentations that we gave to the F2 Pool leadership. We called it Project Eleonora because Eleonora is Greta Thunberg's middle name, and um, eventually we ended up purchasing carbon credits uh, as a part of our 8th anniversary in May of last year. So that was pretty cool. And we worked closely with Regen to purchase these carbon credits, specifically nature-based ones. So yeah, and it's been definitely a whirlwind of activity in the crypto climate space. So excited to see one of the pioneers keeping on.
Cool. Thanks, Daniel. I think it might be interesting to just share a little bit about some of the initial work that we were working on. So maybe I'll do a little bit of framing, and then pass it back over to you. And just for everybody who may not be, super deep in the sort of protocol proof of stake world, Stakefish is a really incredible validating operation. They're kind of, I think, a validator that many other validators look up to in terms of professionalism and community building, and just the amount that they're engaging with research, development, grants. I mean, Stakefish co-funded a lot of the work that happened on CosmWasm that then is turned into Juno, which is now, an amazing smart contracting network in the Cosmos ecosystem. And obviously, CosmWasm is also used on Terra, and we'll be running CosmWasm on Regen Ledger. So just like Stakefish is really a pillar of multiple different communities. So we're really excited to have Stakefish on board. So I just wanted to share a little bit more, like, because Daniel's a very humble dude, so he'd probably never hype himself in that way, or Stakefish. But it's pretty awesome. We're excited, and the original work that we've been doing around Project Eleonora really had to do with automating and wrapping the greening of Bitcoin. So like creating a wrapped green Bitcoin, so that could be used in DeFi as a sort of green or regenerative asset. And I'm still really excited about that. I know there are still Regen community members working on this, and actually, with the rise of Axelar network, which is super cool, and starting to work with some of the bridge technologies starting to mature, I actually think in a lot of ways, Regen Network's role in helping bundle provable, verifiable offsets with whether it's Bitcoin or a wrapped ETH or NFTs to sort of create an offset financial instrument, I think is becoming ever closer for that original vision. So, Daniel, I don't know if you want to just share a little bit about um, your perspective about how things are kind of evolving, because things have moved a lot since we were working on that early space, and just share a little bit, you know, at both as a validator, but also as a representative of a mining company, where you're seeing this sort of greening of assets evolve as things move forward.
Yeah, there's a lot. Um, there's so much that we've done together. I think, yes. So we've been working on that paper actually for a very long time that we haven't yet published on this greening assets. I think as we've seen this sort of Cambrian explosion of crypto climate projects hit the scene more recently, we are getting a really good sense of a lot of these. I guess we can call them like green money Legos that are very composable and work together and leads directly to the point that you made, Gregory, on right green assets, where right green Bitcoin is an example of one. Um, so I guess I could go back to actually like some of the successes and failures of what Project Eleonora ended up with. So F2 pool, I was we weren't really seeing too much clamor from the traditional or our clients about right crypto is evil, it's burning down the planet. I think we were seeing a little glimmers of it from the NFT community, and I think I was like, we need to make sure. I knew this was going to happen. Like there's as NFT adoption was bringing many more people, especially artists, onto the scene who I would say more lean towards kind of like the ideological of like environment conscious aspects. So we're like, let's do this. I was actually introduced to Gregory through a friend of mine who was a Vice journalist at the time, who was interested in some of this climate impact. And so Gregory and I started getting jamming on Project Eleonora about, yes, a lot of what Regen was offering, especially from some of these foundational tools to do measurement and automation, and also most importantly, a lot of this fact checking and data fact checking, where they've been like building a lot of this incredible technology to do this and get us connected to the blockchain of what it's really used for. So we basically it was let's one of the first steps was purchasing carbon credits. Um, I myself I was a miner back in 2013. That's when I started my journey, and so like I understood the mindset of sort of profit maximization. But right, F2 pool being F2 pool, we needed to, I think, really understand the focus of right profit maximization and who our clients were, as F2 pool is a mining pool, and our clients are mining farms and miners that contribute their hash power to us. That being said, the sell was what happens when you purchase carbon credits, right? You get to offset your emissions, both right from the servers that we run all the way down to even like how many offices that we have or how many people commute, because that all goes into the calculations. But then it's also like, what do we get out of it? And we get like a PR bump, and that was sort of one of the main draws. the thing is, like, these PR bumps that a company could potentially get from offsetting their carbon emissions beyond the kind of service that, right, each of us as individuals and human beings have as responsibility to the planet that we live on. It's right. It's to also make sure that we are able to attract good clientele. And we've seen like that with Microsoft, right? Like I think Regen is like one of Microsoft's closest partners for purchasing carbon credits and emissions to offset their emissions. And there is a very clear kind of connection that these B2C companies like Microsoft have for what makes sense for them to purchase carbon credits, because people like want to, be patrons of, right, a company that is doing good, right, and is not just like, turning a blind eye or burying their heads under the sand and not addressing some of the footprint that they have on this planet. However, right, with the profit maximization mentality that I would say miners have more these days versus like how a lot of miners were like in 2013 or earlier, who are more ideologically motivated, right? It's like even like an interesting switch between, do I switch my mining power to green energy, which some have, or do I purchase carbon credits to offset, or do I want to contribute my hash power to a mining pool that uh, is offsetting our emissions for us? And I would say, on the whole, perhaps those types of clients or stakeholders don't necessarily have too much of an impact of like them being contributing to us if we're offsetting emissions, right? It's maybe I wouldn't. It would maybe be even an extreme way to say it is like they don't care, right? And so then, what would have been the goals of us as servicing our clients? Like, yeah, what happens if we offset our emissions beyond our stewardship that we are responsible for on a broader scale? If they don't care, then what's going on? What is this particular ROI coming from? Which, as that's bluntly putting it, like, okay, that makes sense. But still, just because that makes sense doesn't mean that we should just kind of, lay down and say, okay, there's nothing we can do about it. And so even so, I as I mentioned, we ended up purchasing carbon credits later, right? And it's kind of like we went through the side door basically instead of going through the front door. And it came down to also why we ended up setting up this working group together to investigate both measurement methodologies and also offsetting initiatives. Is that it actually came down to some elements of how, like, even the Bitcoin security mechanism had operated, where right, it's this concept of good behavior has to be incentivized, where right, for context, in the Bitcoin system, right, these miners, their primary goal is to maximize their profits, right? They buy efficient equipment, buy the cheapest energy they can, and then they contribute their hash power to large pools, so they have a higher probability of getting these Bitcoin rewards. And it's not just Bitcoin, but all other POW coins. And so in that case, right, the goals of these miners may not necessarily be the adherence or the mission drivenness of what we all see Bitcoin as, of like this decentralization, self-sovereignty, and censorship resistance. The primary goal is, right, to make this money, and then by these miners or these participants making this money, and obeying the system, right, downloading the software and obeying what it says so you can get this money. The side effects of what they're doing, their primary goal of profit maximization, the side effects is the decentralization, self-sovereignty, and censorship resistance. And in that case, we've seen like how that mechanism had been crafted. The good behavior of what we all want, of how these miners act, was incentivized because they're, at the end of the day, getting a check or getting rewards, and then everyone who uses the Bitcoin network benefits from that. And so with that mindset, we really kind of went to the drawing board and saw like, hey, this is like, we are in this sort of mercenary world. Like, good behavior cannot rely on altruism as much as we'd love the world to operate like that. Um, and so we reframed it into sort of this sense of, okay, let's define good behavior now as um, doing something that can offset emissions, right? Like purchasing carbon credits or even like switching to renewable energy. And so with that in mind and that defined, we were like, okay, we need to now incentivize it. And how do we incentivize it? And so this now finally goes back to what Gregory had mentioned with this sort of green assets or green Bitcoin. We need to find a way where people have to desire purchasing carbon credits, for example, and that has to be profitable for them or lucrative for them. And so we came up with this idea of green assets. And it's not just green assets are an example of a sort of demand sink that we need to see more of for these carbon credits that are being tokenized and brought on chain to have a lot more utility given like the wide expanse of like DeFi money Legos and composability that we see. We need that to be incentivized. And so, right, there's demand sinks. We've seen very big projects like KlimaDAO being a demand sink for carbon credits where you can deposit it, lock it up in a vault, and you get to appreciate these assets on S-Klima or Klima, but also green assets. So, and in short, for these green assets is you can package up. Now you have tokenized carbon credits. You can package them up with like wrapped tokens or Bitcoin, Ethereum, any other token that you can imagine, NFTs. And then that is another demand sink where people are now going to be incentivized to purchase these carbon credits because they have an opportunity to put them and attach them to things. And then you can appreciate and have a price appreciation on them, arbitrage. You can have premiums on Bitcoin. Then if you have wrapped green Bitcoin, they can go into the DeFi borrowing and lending protocols, collateralization, and on and on. And so you have this like this virtuous cycle happening. And okay, so that's kind of the story behind how this all had happened, and like these very important flywheels that have to be built in as we had seen happen successfully in the Bitcoin system. Okay, I'll stop. That was long. I'll stop there. But...
Gregory, you're on mute. Thank you, Daniel, for dropping all that knowledge. Gregory, do you have follow-up questions, or even some of our other speakers, just to pick that up?
No, that was great, Daniel. Thanks for the history, and definitely excited for people to, just sort of like get some of the context and, I guess get a window into this other element of what becomes possible to sort of partner between, maybe the part of the crypto industry that we as sort of, I guess, the Regenerati are less excited about, but that actually can be a flywheel for, there's actually this really, at least for me, I'm very excited about the possibility of working hand in hand to drive regenerative asset creation by wrapping Bitcoin and doing other offsetting stuff. So thanks for a little bit of the overview there. So I think it's probably good to maybe shift gears in the conversation a little bit. We've got some folks from Regen Foundation who've hopped up, Will and Austin. So, and I think Austin, maybe this is your first time in this venue at least. So yeah, would love to maybe hand it over to Austin first and then Will, and just, if you want to just do a quick introduction and talk about what you're up to at the foundation, and then we can kind of jam and see where the conversation flows.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, everybody. This is my first time being in this venue, so I'm super happy to be here. It's really fun to hear. It's really fun to see everybody like gather around and like get these kind of like deep dives that Daniel just broke down. So that was great. I'm Austin Wade Smith. I am one of the directors of the endowment program at the Regen Foundation. which is different than Regen R&D, the Regen Network. And so the foundation is a 501c3 that's really committed to this larger question of the community staking DAO and how it interrelates to the larger evolution, integrity, and kind of health of the Regen Network ecosystem writ large. As part of the work that I do, I'm mostly focused on initiatives in the kind of North American context, the sort of air quotes global north, of building bridges across many different types of regenerative practitioners, whether they be scientists developing eco-credit methodologies, engineers wanting to develop open source hardware or software projects, which are instrumental in the process of verifying regeneration, activists, land stewards themselves, rights of nature initiatives, and trying to build a lot of different bridges so that there's a kind of symbiotic co-benefit, co-empowerment that's happening, and spending a lot of time thinking about not just building a lot of bridges, but like how to route new ideas and new projects across those bridges in an efficient and like kind of elegant way. So it's a really exciting time, this like very beginning of 2022 at the foundation, as this large population of different land stewards and different scientists and engineers are really kind of like gearing up to really start building out new methodologies and working on building out their DAO governance systems. And maybe I'll just kind of keep it brief for at least my warm up here and say that one of the things that I'm really interested in doing in this kind of community staking DAO project is to find a meaningful symbiosis between land-based DAOs and like guild or practice-based DAOs. And land-based is perhaps a bit more self-evident, like entities which are bioregionally based. They're really tethered to a particular ecosystem, to a particular practice, to a particular relationship with ecology and biodiversity, that particular soil series, that particular watershed, and how to have meaningful dialogue with DAOs that are bioregionally driven with ones that are more practiced or guild based, i.e. scientists who are working on building new eco-credit methodologies, or people who are really focused on some of the specificities of blue carbon, people who are wanting to instrumentalize machine learning to build new kinds of methodologies that would use, audio analysis to, determine biodiversity present within a particular site. And so that's really like kind of not so much tethered to a particular location, but tethered to a particular kind of practice and skill set and technique that we use within the Regen process, the Regen network. And I really love the idea of having these DAOs in kind of mutual symbiosis, mutual benefit, or kind of like productive tension. And so we're spending a lot of time at the foundation thinking about how we kind of curate and how we organize the larger community, or how we incentivize its growth, so that we have this nice balance between location-driven projects and really like skill methodology-driven projects. And I'll stop there and maybe pass it over to Will, but thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Austin. Actually, I feel like you brought up so many things there, and also just that interesting question, I guess, dialectic of like guild DAOs and land-based DAOs. I think I can introduce myself. I'm Will, president of the board of Regen Foundation. I've been supporting Regen Network since summer of 2017, and based in Western Mass. But Austin, I think you touched on a lot of great things there. So maybe we just pause to see if there are other contributions or questions from other folks here.
I have listening to this, like connecting this energy between both what Regen Foundation is undertaking and then the work that you, Daniel, are undertaking with the Blockchain Infrastructure Carbon Working Group. And that when we think about mutual symbiosis and we think about virtuous cycles, they're really so related. And it seems so very tied to community and storytelling in the right way, and building capacity in the right way, and bridging gaps between different communities. And I can't help but just be super excited about how all these different initiatives will touch on each other. And I think the idea of productive tension, because there are going to be some big problems to address, and I feel like the ones that come to my mind that I can imagine are shared by others is how to reach the diversity of interests. There's so much enthusiasm to be involved. So how do we reach that? How do we communicate to it? What are the ideas, the things that are being worked on more specifically with the working group, the things that are being worked on more specifically with Regen Foundation? Maybe that was a intro for any layer pullback for you, Daniel, or for you, Austin, about some of the initiatives. I know with the working group, it's very much focused on public facing efforts with community events and crafting narratives and PR. And with Regen Foundation, a lot of around governance. Wondering about pulling that layer back.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just processing all the different kind of levels of the question, and it's a really good question. I think that one of the things that I think is pretty alive for myself working with the foundation and thinking through community staking DAOs and the endowment program is it kind of goes back to a topic that came up on the retreat that the Regen Network R&D had a couple weeks ago, where we're talking about methodologies which are, shall I say, less reductive than carbon, and understanding and sort of adding depth and complexity to the practices and the metrics and methods of quantification for what regeneration looks like beyond just saying total absorbed carbon in the soil, for example. And so this kind of practice-based methodologies opens up a really exciting kind of space of potential that might not just be pure outcome, might not just be okay, like a kind of single data point of carbon per amount of area or something. And so, as I see the Regen Network evolving and growing, I'm really excited to think about and help nurture a greater diversity of parameters and methodologies with which regeneration can be defined. And one of the interesting questions that really came up in some of my work I was just doing before this call had to do with in order for a new kind of sort of a new dimension or a new kind of eco credit to exist, it needs to have a certain kind of demand. It has to be able to be situated within a particular market where there's a demand for it. And currently, we have these kinds of big anchors with carbon. The carbon market is well established. Maybe that's perhaps more vanilla or more accessible. But how are we building these new kinds of eco credit methodologies, which are kind of walking? They're not walking away from carbon per se, but they're taking the solidity of people's understanding from this established convention in regenerative economics, and trying to work towards markets that might support biodiversity, that markets that might support pollinator health, markets that would support remediation of pollution, of watersheds, etc. And so one of the things that kind of stands out to me in this question, and I'll let anyone and take it how they like, is building new eco credits and new parameters and kind of dimensions of regeneration within the Regen Network is really exciting. And the big question for me is how are we building awareness, literacy, and markets so that there's a corresponding demand for this sort of space of regeneration beyond just carbon. And with that, well, if we just do methodologies without creating a space where there's understanding, sort of literacy and a market that grows in parallel with support from the Regen Network, then perhaps we're not seeing the whole picture. It's a kind of reciprocal effect. And that is for in the immediate future, a major question for what Will and I and others over at the foundation are doing. And maybe I'll just stop there and see if that stirs up anything in anybody else.
That's awesome. Thanks, Austin. I mean, Daniel, how might you like meet that idea, this idea of building awareness, literacy, and parallel market building?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's something that we at the working group had talked extensively about. Right, some of the, I guess, like the four pillars that we had um, put together was, right, like these events that need to happen. We had like some events in New York, in Twitter Spaces, and future events where there can be exposure and visibility. But the other pillars, right, include, right, making sure that there is like a brain trust of crypto climate experts, folks like Gregory, and who has been had extensive experience in the climate space, who can uh, speak with authority on these concepts, right? And these also include content like these articles that we put out, social media, press releases that we've put out, um, right? Podcasts, and then also like helping become like a clearinghouse to make sure that, let's say, like, I guess, climate um, people who are not as familiar with climate who are crypto native, and then there's also people who are from, let's say, the Web 2 non crypto native world, who are interested in kind of getting more information and education on what actually is happening, instead of kind of taking the crypto is burning down the planet and then just leaving and then just writing an article about it. Um, it's an interesting, and so yeah, it's the ability to communicate effectively, and maybe unfortunately or fortunately, making sure that you are loud enough that most people can hear it, and so they can operate right or build with the appropriate knowledge. And something that and to add to that, it's an interesting sort of, I don't know if it's like a dilemma, but it's an interesting problem that you have, especially under the context of decentralization, or like kind of fair and permissionless um, building, where it's the level of understanding and climate knowledge that folks like Gregory and many of the Regen team have is sort of like a gate, right? It comes with a lot of education, learning, experience, and when you have, right, in certain cases like this Cambrian explosion, there are inevitably going to be people who are going to try to earnestly and honestly build quality solutions to the problems that we're facing, and also um, more experiments. And some of those will be guided well, and be doing and kind of going about it the quote unquote right way, as subjective as that sounds. But there also are kind of wrong ways that exist, that it's kind of like this tug of war of like, how do we maintain decentralization and permissionlessness in this, especially in the backdrop of what we're building on in crypto, but make sure that there is like a responsible way of building, right? We don't have some sort of like Illuminati council that's going to say like, hey, your project is right or your project is wrong. But I think, yeah, but sorry, long story short, that's what we had been kind of working on and kind of providing guidance for all audience members that include Web 2 normies, climate newbies, and providing just kind of like direction to the right people to talk, and to all of those stakeholders. So
This is this is a really important point, Daniel, especially if for those of you in the audience who've been keeping track of some of the present moment drama in the regenerative finance space related to base carbon ton and nature-based credits and Klima DAO and Toucan and anonymous actors trying to arb out value and Toucan team trying to save value and like create some sort of mechanism to sort of reward people who'd taken risk, but struggling with the complexity of that task because it's quite complex. There are a lot of, just sort of like to say, a headline, there are a lot of sort of like hazards in creating the right infrastructural and community governance approach to this intersection of financialization of natural capital and empowering community groups to govern and define their own ecologically coherent stores of value and units of account. Like this is we're all walking on this razor's edge, and it's really important. And I think I think it's really important that we have open and transparent and responsible conversations about what could go wrong, right? And we do our best to create, just real transparent, community-driven norms and standards about how we're going to address these challenges. This is what the incumbent financial industry actually doesn't do very well, right? It's sort of, there's shadiness on all levels. And in some ways, sort of like the degen DeFi space also doesn't do this so well, right? It's kind of a dog eat dog world out there. And to some, and this is the biggest challenge. I think this is the biggest challenge to scaling regenerative finance. And it's the biggest challenge, something that we think a lot about at Regen Network. And it's something that really plays in. It's just been up a lot, the regenerative, this sort of Cambrian explosion that's been happening in the refi space has been taking off. There's a bunch of anonymous teams. There's a bunch of, there's this intersection with protocol-owned liquidity and the Olympus protocol, which is an entirely anonymous community. There's this mashup of nature-based climate solutions and carbon markets and DeFi. And I think we're kind of at a branch in the road. I mean, I don't want to be super dramatic about this, but I think we're at a branch in the road. And down one path, there's sort of like doing it the hard way, but the right way. And on the other path, there's doing it the easy way, but the wrong way. One way is quick money and, fast launches and sacrificing integrity and community inclusion for sort of like the easy narrative. And on the other hand is sort of a much more challenging, dynamic, and complex set of questions without easy answers, in which we're really trying to lean into a process to embody what sort of openness, transparency, building in public, and building community around these questions can achieve. And, I sort of, with that sort of like, just sort of me sharing that, I'd love to hear, what folks up here or folks out in the audience are thinking about that, because I really do think we're at this very tenuous moment in the emergence of this movement. Like, is regenerative finance just going to be gobbled up by easy money, or are we actually going to build something that's transformative?
I could quickly speak to that, but I'd love to hear a lot of other people's opinions, especially among the speakers and listeners. There's like this concept that is very familiar, especially also from the validator perspective, where you have like these new industries popping up in crypto that are really exciting, a lot of building, but you are also inherently, and there's a lot of cooperation and coordination and collaboration, but then you are also inherently understanding that there is, competition. Right. For example, in the validator space, the protocol specialist role, I don't think that even like that role existed up until like a year ago. And that is like one of the most, very in demand roles that as POS has sort of become the dominant narrative for a lot of blockchains. There's a lot of co-building that validators have to do together. But we also know we're also at competition with each other. And right, this sort of like, intra-chain, we're competitive, inter-chain, between chains, we're collaborative. And the important point there is that we know that we have to support each other in order to make sure that we have, at least in the validator space, a strong foundation that we can at least set, and then right, we're off to the races, of respectful competition, right? We can do whatever competition and right. I think the same thing is happening in the crypto climate space. I think it's very important that a lot of the players and stakeholders understand that there needs to be collaboration, so we have a good foundation set, and then we can have all these bridges, and then we can have all these standards, and then we can have all these projects that are competitive with each other, right? We have multiple DEXs that exist in DeFi. We have multiple lending platforms that exist in DeFi, but the foundation was set first. So there has been definitely some drama, but I think most people need to understand that the foundation has to be set, and good principles and good faith ensured before we can actually go off to the races. So that's what I'll say on the controversy.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, there's so much to dig in here, and I didn't mean to put you or anybody else on the spot, but I think it's an important conversation. And there's like big questions. What is the role of anonymity in building something that has integrity? There's really positive cases to be made for that, for privacy and anonymity. There's also potentially negative things. So there's all these hard questions, again, that I think are just worth sort of like having dialogue about and starting to build the capability of the community to be thinking about this and discerning. Rex, you wanted to hop up here. I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Greg, and really appreciate your support from the community funding side. If people in the room don't know, I'm organizing an in-person refi summit in Seattle in May. And the reason I'm doing this is because I feel like there's been a massive set of innovations on the sustainability and Web3 side over the last 2 years, while nobody has ever been able to meet each other. And I had this concept of putting people together to discuss these exact issues about effectiveness and what is the best use of time, energy, resources, how to measure it. Because I do see, like, I've been starting to track the number of refi projects, and it's just astonishing. Like, I started building this list, and I'm just adding new ones every single day. And I think this space in particular is going to attract a lot of people who want to do the right thing. And then I think the next step is, well, let's put these people together and we'll talk about how to make these efforts collectively effective. And if there are duplications of things that we should be collaborating on, we can reduce those and talk that through. So that's kind of my thinking about this refi summit. And I imagine it as a offsite for the entire industry, because we're in this remote work world. And my experience from working in the past is that if everybody's remote and everybody never gets to meet, you get these tremendous amounts of dislocation when all the conversation is only on text or anonymously or in messages. And my hope is that the refi movement as a whole could use this summit, which I've raised enough funding to produce to try and work through some of these issues. So I just want to create a time and a place where we can try and synchronize as an industry, I suppose. So thanks a lot. I got to drop off, but really appreciate your support.
Yeah, Rex, do you have dates for that?
refisummit.org and DM me. And we're in active planning phases. But as far as funding goes, like it's covered. Like this event is on, the venue's booked. And I just like there's just some questions around who's going to show up, and
what are the dates?
Yeah,
what are the dates?
May 10th and 11th.
Cool. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
I'm pretty amped about that. Just to sort of like follow up briefly, I'm pretty amped about that. There are some other so there's refi spring. There's this concept that's emerged just to sort of go on that direction, which I think is in keeping. Like, where do we have these conversations? Okay, we've got the Twitter space, Regenerati News Hour. There's the DeFi, there's the refi DAO space, there's the Friday space, and to some degree, each of our Twitter spaces. I mean, we really try hard on this Regenerati News Hour, I think, to not just be sort of like shilling regen, but to be having substantive conversations about what is emerging in our network, in the larger space. And nonetheless, this is like a regen network centered Twitter space. So having a neutral ground, I guess, I really resonate with Rex's sort of invitation there. And I also think it's quite important, to get in-person time. There are, as I was mentioning, I think there's this emerging concept both that we need to sort of like have networked local events, right? But also maybe from time to time, we all need to get together, those of us in the movement, and get to meet each other and have fun conversations, sometimes have hard conversations. So I'm excited about the event in May. I'm feeling horrible FOMO myself about not going to East Denver and Shelling Point, which is, I think there's going to be a number of different folks in this space who are getting to spend some time together there as well. So maybe we'll sort of experience a building of the conversation. It's right in the middle of maple season for me, so I'm gonna be boiling some syrup here. But anyway, thanks, Rex, again for sort of presenting that opportunity. So I kind of want to circle back around. I'd love to get Austin, Will, on the Regen Foundation side, if you all have any thoughts about just sort of the role of, I think the role of Regen Foundation in the way that we've tried to be building Regen Network out as really a place where we're trying to think through some of the harder questions here around, creating a network in which vulnerable communities, smallholder farmers, indigenous people, landscapes themselves aren't at risk of sort of being rugged, while also creating financial tooling for them to be valued. What's the role of Regen Foundation as an institution, as a Web3 institution, in helping navigate some of the hazards of this sort of digitization of value and sort of engaging with the decentralized finance space? Do either of you have anything to share on that? Go ahead, Will.
Yeah, sure. I think so. Our white paper frames out kind of this market commons, and there's always this. I guess there's a lot of ways to break down the world, but one way is kind of in this trifecta of states, markets, and commons. And one of the things that the foundation is stewarding here are these community staking DAOs, which are essentially commons of sorts in that there's a shared resource base, that both the tokens and then everything off chain, from the landscapes to the people and the community kind of governing. And this goes back to what Austin was saying. There's going to be multiple kinds of DAOs, some that are guild-based, where there's an open science DAO, or others that are place-based, such as an Amazon DAO. And I think one of the questions I've seen come up in a lot of places in the osmosis community, our board member Kia and is part of Gnosis Guild, and she has been putting out a lot of stuff about DAOs. I think one of the big questions in the space right now is how to get the right people at the table when it's time to make a specific decision. If if we're looking at Regen Network as the context, there are going to be grasslands methodologies, there will be ocean health methodologies, there will be river health methodologies, methane emission methodologies, and then there's many other places in the stack as well. Like if we're looking at insurance protocols that are built on top of those things. And I think one of the big challenges in the crypto space has been essentially bundling governance all into one layer where all token holders collectively vote on a specific issue. And sometimes you end up with a hard fork where two parts of the community go two different ways. And I think one of the questions Regen Foundation is asking, and just a question that's really alive in the space right now in general, is how do we have more nuanced and subtle governance processes where you have kind of the right people participating in the decision making. And so I'd say that's one of the biggest areas of inquiry for the foundation right now.
And so sort of double clicking on that and going a layer deeper, do you want to share a little bit? I mean, so do you want to share a little bit about who is right in what circumstance to be participating? You know, because I think the potential to sort of recreate an elite technocratic structure is really very, at least present in my mind. It's like, how do we make it so that, you know, there's the right mix of competence but inclusion? You know, what's the, and this is a hard question, and I don't expect sort of like an easy sort of like branded answer, right? But just like, what are the processes that you all at the foundation are leaning into to think about, for instance, who's governing the standards, the registry of approved standards on chain, or the types of financial protocols that may be secured by Regen Ledger? Do you want to just speak another layer deeper about that, Will?
Yeah, one of the values that we establish in the white paper is that if you're going to have markets, that the people participating in those markets, especially the indigenous land stewards, the rights of nature projects, the smallholder farmers, those are some of the voices that really need to be included in the process, and that historically have been left out of the process. That there's been these global commodity markets where the purchasers of these commodities kind of unilaterally determine the rules of the game. And one of the aims here with the community staking DAOs is to be working with the producers of those commodities. And in this case, when I say commodities, speaking of carbon credits, biodiversity credits, other things like that. So yes, very, very complex issue, but I think just going back to some of our founding values, the answer of who are the right people, the right people are those that are directly participating and directly affected by these markets.
Awesome. Thank you.
Maybe I could add to that before I have to jump in a couple minutes, but yep. I do think that perhaps it's inevitable to have some sort of kind of authoritative voice for the type of climate decisions. So for example, I mean, this is an extreme example, but right, if someone were to be saying like, if I myself maybe not myself, but like someone else who has no idea what is going on with the climate or what registries are, or even like some of these more basic ideas of carbon credits or climate, and they have the same kind of vote or voice as someone like you, Gregory, who has been doing this for 15 plus years. I feel like that might be kind of like a dangerous affordance given to people in like a permissionless system, especially if you have like anonymous people voting or not. Because like there are like a lot of DAOs that are being set up to be able to like kind of control a lot of the governance and direction of climate projects. I don't know if it's going to be like a technocracy or climate-cracy that is going to be governing everything and is like the final word. But I definitely don't think that normal people should have that as some sort of like foundational effect on what may happen. As a quick example, at least in let's say for like the Polkadot space, right? There is when governance happens, there is like certain things that the normal retail governance can touch, but then there's also a technical committee of people who actually understand how the technology works and the infrastructure works that they touch as well. Instead of like, you have like some Alex Jones type that weaponizes his media platform to like change block sizes because people have one person, one vote and overwhelm us. It's something like that. I was, what do you think, Gregory?
I don't think there's any super easy answers. I think there's a downside. There's sort of like, there's downsides and upsides. And I think that this tension of, I have some amount of faith that we can iterate through with the right principles and at least be improving the governance and transparency of the system. And I happen to believe that we do need to embed markets into essentially a commons system. And so stakeholders need to be managing that. And that needs to be that certain things need to be sort of, governed by people who are enormously technically literate. Other things need to be governed by scientists who are enormously literate in their own way. And other things need to be governed by land stewards and indigenous people who are also enormously literate in their own way. And that there's sort of there's this intersection where kind of discerning what everybody needs to be able to have consensus about is important, right? And we have this commons, which in the Regen Network framework is a single shared public infrastructure for accounting for ecological state and state changes and verifying those and quantifying those and creating assets or certificates about those. And that all of these different stakeholders on any side of the market all need sort of a shared pre-competitive infrastructure together. And everyone needs to participate to a certain degree in the governance of things. But just as you're saying, Daniel, I think and I think this is kind of like part of the nested governance approach that has been emerging at Regen Network, and it's a central part of the community staking DAO strategy. I think that the foundation is stewarding. It's like who is stewarding specific parameters or lists or approvals or tags that allow us to sort of build out integrity is really important. So I think there's a reconciliation there. I really apologize. I've got to hop, and I think most of the other speakers do. This always happens where we get really into the meat of a beautiful conversation. I'm not sure, David, Rebecca, if you all are capable, or Austin, of holding things open. I see a bunch of people requesting to speak right now. I've got to hop into the rest of my day. So my sense is we should probably close, and people who are excited to dig into this, we should have a little flurry of conversation on Twitter, and then maybe have this as an item that we continue to bring up in this forum. But David, if you've got tons of time, I'm happy to pass it over to you and have you keep the space open and see where the conversation goes.
Hi, thanks, Gregory. Yeah, I appreciate that. And thank you, Gregory and Daniel. If anyone wants to stay on another 10 minutes, I'm happy to hold the space, or 15. Otherwise, we can wrap it up. If you want to give me some thumbs up, or you're happy to move on. I know there's a couple other speakers here.
Cool. I'm gonna hop off. Yeah, I'm super grateful for everybody who showed up, and just really excited about our this dynamic conversation and community. So thanks everybody, and I'll see you all out on the interwebs.